done that. We have now started trying to revive the BMC, as you're aware, because that really is the basis of the export market, to ensure that it itself operates effectively, which it hadn't been doing very effectively. And I think Red Tombali is doing a very good job in that regard, and we're starting to see it turn around.
I'd like to now move on to employment, Your Excellency, and youth empowerment and employment is obviously among your key priorities, because you said so yourself. And there are several youth empowerment initiatives that can be acknowledged. But I want to pick on the reformed or revised Untitled Chapter program, because it is one of those that has attracted much commentary, with some hailing it for what it has to offer, but others criticizing it as too costly and unsustainable. Can you explain this program in the format that it's now coming, and why it had to be different from the one before it?
You know, if it was too costly and unsustainable, we wouldn't have embarked upon it in the first instance. That I want to assure. Any program that we undertake in this country, we look at its sustainability to ensure that it's something we can continue for the long term, if it is necessary to do so. So that's the first point I wanted to make, because it's so easy just to criticize and say something is unsustainable. You know, as a government, one thing I try to do when I go around and have as many Khote meetings as I do, when I go around and try and meet as many people as I do, is to try to understand and get a sense of what it is Botswana want their government to do for them. Because when you talk about democracy, the fundamental principle of democracy, you know, is people. And when people vote for a party to come into office, to become the government, it's the expectations of that government must improve their welfare. So my understanding is that when there are challenges, when you go around and see people, and people say, Ghana, we are youth, we are unemployed, we are not doing anything, we just hang around in our villages doing nothing, there are no jobs. That is an indication to me, and a strong indication, that that becomes a priority. All these programs that I have introduced since I came into office are not my programs. These are programs that Botswana have said they want. So the youth is something, if you look around the world, you'll see that it is a challenge, it is a growing problem. And I've decided that we want to reverse that trend in Botswana. Again, like when I talked about the drought, we're not going to fold our arms and say that there's not much we can do. It's something that is happening worldwide. Let us be unique, let us do something different. So when we reintroduced this Untitled Chapter program, the difference is that it would not be a gap year between senior secondary school and university. I think when you finish your education, you should go on to the next stage of education. You shouldn't interrupt it with anything. That's why I thought we should break away from that old system. And when someone is at school, they are doing something productive. We are educating them. They then go on to tertiary education. They are doing something productive. What we need to pick up on are those who are not doing anything productive, those who are not employed. And therefore, by introducing Untitled Chapter, we are saying that in your villages, wherever you are, we engage the youth in supporting activities of government, of the local authorities, in their communities, to be able to make an impact and a contribution within their communities. And we will be able to give them some allowance. Yes, it's not a lot of money, but it is better than nothing. And so instead of sitting around doing nothing, and whilst waiting for formal employment opportunities to come along, we can be keeping them busy, doing something useful. So they benefit, the communities benefit. And we say at the end of their period, we have set aside money for them, so that when they exit, they have a lump sum that they can use to go and do something, some small business, or the YDF will top them up so that they can start venturing into other things of their own. so that they will eventually, even if they don't get formal employment through other means, they may be able to set up something of their own. So that is the whole purpose of it.
Just for clarity, the money set aside is coming from the allowance that they will be getting?
Yes. And an additional amount is set aside for them so that, and they can't draw on it within a year. They have to do at least 1 year. And as you said, as you know, it's between the ages of 20 and 30. So you can stay in the program for 10 years if you want to. The other thing we are making sure is we say 20 years old and not 18 or 19, because some would have finished school at 18, 19. We don't want to take them away from finding education opportunities, because education is key to everything. So they mustn't leave education and say, no, we are rushing off to go and get this allowance. We want them to try, in the first instance, to continue their education. And then, after that, when they exit. The other thing is that the only people who go into it are those who have also been back to school. So we want to make sure that all young people do finish their schooling before being able to go into Untitled Chapter, because education is the key to everything.
I want to touch on general unemployment, connecting to this Untitled Chapter initiative, to just acknowledge that of course it's an ongoing challenge even for big economies, the US, China for example. How are you tackling job creation in Botswana? Do you have some kind of target, if I can put it that way, to which you would aim to reduce unemployment among job-seeking Botswana?
I will never make the mistake of setting a target. Never. I have seen with alarm that in an election year, presidents, and I won't mention who, will say we'll create so many million jobs in 5 years and so on. They've never been able to meet that target, because the world economy is so volatile right now. Things go wrong, within a day, within a week. You wake up one morning, you find that things have collapsed. So you cannot promise, and people in a year's time will then say, but you said you'd create 1 million jobs, or 5 million jobs, or 6 million jobs by so and so, and you haven't been able to do it. I will never promise Botswana things which I cannot guarantee. I think it's irresponsible. I would never do that. So all I can promise them is that I will endeavor to do my best for them to be able to get jobs. And everything we are doing right now in terms of foreign direct investment, and when we talk about even poverty eradication, because when you talk about FDI is not the only way of creating jobs. The most effective way of creating jobs is through the SMME program, where people can set up on their own small businesses, employ a few people, and you have a lot of those dotted all over the country. And that is why the CEDAs that we have done, the YDFs which we are doing, and the poverty eradication programs which will also allow people to stand on their feet, these are all job creation. Ipeleheng is not job creation. I know there are some who'd like to say, is this our answer to creating jobs? It is not. Ipeleheng is a stopgap. Again, instead of people just sitting around doing nothing, at least they can be contributing to their local communities whilst earning something and growing their local economies, because the money that those Ipeleheng people who are engaged on, what they do with their money doesn't always sit in their pockets. They spend it, and they spend it in their local economies, and that grows their local economies and creates employment. That's why we are doing it.
I want to move to the international scene, so to speak, international relations, Mr. President, and of course indicate that, as you know, Botswana is not an island, and so I'd like to ask you about your government's dealings with neighbors and the rest of the world. What is Botswana's foreign policy with respect to the resolution of conflict in countries such as South Sudan? These are just examples. Mozambique, the upcoming of what conflict used to have gone, and even Syria as far afield as that.
In Botswana we have been so lucky, and I think sometimes there are some people here who take our peace for granted and don't know how special we are living on a continent which for many years has been torn apart by turmoil. And what is so disappointing is that we see it continuing. There was a period 3, 4, 5 years ago where I was beginning to believe that we had turned the corner on this continent, and that good governance was starting to take root, democracy was starting to take root. But like we know in recent times, then we had Mali, and then we have now the Central African Republic, and now South Sudan, and then the resurgence of Renamo in Mozambique. You know, it is so discouraging, it's disappointing, it's frustrating that these things still continue to happen. So we have always taken the point of view that as much as possible, you know, when you see all these things happening, I put it down to one thing: intolerance. Intolerance of someone's political affiliation, intolerance to someone's tribe or ethnic group. And that brings about intolerance to even national interest. You put self-interest before national interest. These are the cause of the conflicts and on the continent. And so in some cases, some of them haven't matured enough. And that's why we see these things going on. And that's why we took a position that we have been donor recipients in the past. And it has got us to where we are today. The time has come for us to share what we have achieved with others. And that's why we put out a hand to help countries like Malawi, Liberia, South Sudan. Just to share with them our experiences. We are not a donor country, but it's to share what we have done. And you know, offer them scholarships in our country, in our institution, in our education institutions, send teams to go and respond to them asking for us to say, how do you run your public service? How do you run your economy, so that they can learn from that and be able to repeat our success when we talked about our ratings early on. And I think that's something we need to do. So yes, when we see these conflicts coming up again or resurging, it's very difficult, and we are coming under more and more pressure to participate in conflict resolution through sending peacekeeping troops. And it's something that we have sort of been reluctant to do up to now. We've done it in the past. We were in Mozambique, we were in Somalia, and we did very well there. But it is something which has to be thought about and handled with, you have to be assured that in going into a country to help with peacekeeping troops, there will be a positive outcome at the end of the day, as was the case in Mozambique. When you talked about Syria, you know, we have spoken out a lot about Syria, as we did with Libya, where you have one man who wants to stay in power at all costs and is prepared to slaughter his citizens in order to stay in power. What kind of a human being is that? That will turn his military, who are supposed to defend the people, against them. And you know what I find so ridiculous is that when there was this outcry about the use of chemical weapons in Syria, which killed about, I think, just over 100 people. But then you've got conventional weapons killing thousands of people. And the same sort of urgency to do something, to intervene, isn't there with the use of conventional weapons. Does it matter how a person dies? Whether it's through conventional weapons or chemical weapons, people are losing their lives. Intervention is necessary, and you can't allow someone like that, surely, to get away with killing people, innocent people, day in and day out. And that is the thing we stand for in this country, that we want to be part of an international community where these kind of principles and norms are set and implemented and enforced, that we don't have more Gaddafis and more Assads who will be taking away our attention on development.
Democracy, justice and good governance in parts of Africa have been characterized as declining by some of the international human rights bodies, such as the International Criminal Court, Amnesty International, and here specific mention was made of the Central African Republic and Kenya, I think, among others. Do you share this view, and do you believe that leaders in some of the situations should be tried at the International Criminal Court?
The International Criminal Court was set up to have people who have engaged in crimes against humanity answer for that. that there should be justice for the victims. When we signed on to the Rome Statute, we were aware at the time that no one was exempt from appearing before the criminal court if they were accused of committing such crimes. So it doesn't matter who you are, whether you're me or whether it's you. If we engage in those crimes, we should know that we may be indicted. It doesn't matter. I'm not talking about Kenya, I'm not talking about Sudan, I'm not talking about individual. It's just the principle. Now, someone once said to me, should a sitting president, while he's in office, have to appear before the ICC? Shouldn't he rather wait until his term of office has concluded and then he goes to the criminal court? My answer to that person was that Gaddafi was in power for 40 years. We have others on this continent who have been in power for 30 years, 20 years. Are you suggesting that if any president commits a crime, maybe early on in his term, the victims have to wait 10, 20, 30, 40 years before there's justice? Will there still be people alive who need to be witnesses? Would people still remember? Is that justice? So no. I think being a president shouldn't protect us from appearing before the court. And like I say, I don't want to get into names because I don't want to personalize anything, because it may look like it's Botswana versus whoever. That is not the case. I'm just talking about the principle. And there's that principle that we signed on to when we went in with our eyes open. And those same countries who have been also vocal about it, they signed on to the Rome Statute knowing that no one is exempt. So why move the goalposts now when suddenly certain people may find themselves coming in when they're in office? So I think what the ICC needs to do, what I believe the ICC needs to do, is to take into consideration that person's responsibilities when they're in office and try to make arrangements for them to be able to appear without disturbing the role that they have. So in other words, yes, back home, they can hold the courts back home. They can use video technology to do it without someone having to travel. Just take into account that no, maybe at that time the person wasn't in office, now he's in office, so let's see how. And especially when in this case we know that the willingness to cooperate has been put forward. No, I'm prepared to. He's not behaving like Bashir in Sudan, and I don't mind mentioning him, because we know that he's been indicted and he's refusing to cooperate, and that's why we said he would not be welcome in Botswana, Bashir. But with others, I think, we have had this situation where people have got away with impunity, and we can't allow that.
I want to conclude this international questions part with Zimbabwe and say to you that things appear to have quietened down in Zimbabwe since the last elections that gave President Mugabe a contested victory, at least as far as the fairness of the electoral process was concerned. What, Mr. President, is your government's attitude to Zimbabwe now?
I want to correct the word fairness. The SADC observer statement said the elections were free and peaceful. They never used the word fair.
That's why we say contested.
So, okay, fine. That's why we asked for an audit of the election on the Zimbabwe elections. And I just think before I answer your question, I need to explain that. Because SADC had set itself guidelines for the conduct of free and fair elections. And therefore it's incumbent on all of us in SADC to conform to those set of guidelines. And if there's a breach of those guidelines, then we have to say, fine, we have breached these guidelines, what now happens? What do we do about it? And in Zimbabwe, we sent 80 plus or so observers. And almost every one of them said that there were irregularities in that election. And there were. I'm convinced of it. So the point was just to say that we must fix the problem. Because if the guidelines, SADC, were violated and you create that precedent in Zimbabwe, then it means the next elections, because Zimbabwe are going to have elections again, they are likely to repeat the same irregularities. So do we say then Zimbabwe is an exception to the SADC guidelines? If we this year, there's going to be elections in South Africa, elections in Botswana, there are one or two other SADC countries which are going to have elections this year. If we breach the SADC guidelines, and then they then try and point a finger that, this did not go well in Botswana, we can say to them, so what? You let Zimbabwe off the hook, you have to let us off the hook. Then where does it end? Then you may as well pack up your guidelines and throw them out the window. So all we are saying as Botswana is that, hey, let's do an audit. Find out what these irregularities are doing about them, and then what are we going to say about it? So we have written to SADC. I sent a thing to the head of the SADC organ on politics, defense and security, and we sent them a dossier of all the irregularities our people picked up. We sent in that dossier, it also indicates other observer groups who were there, because it wasn't just SADC. There were other observer groups, from civil society and other organizations, who came to the same conclusions as us. To say to them, this is what went wrong, and we await their response. But we have gone on to say that until we get a response, we as Botswana are not going to participate in any more SADC observer missions, because there's no point going there, we see something going wrong, and then it's just, people turn a blind eye to it. Because these observer missions cost money as a country, and we're not going to just throw money down the drain. And we thought the whole idea of having observers is to entrench and to build on the aspect of democracy in our region. That's what we want. And if we are not prepared to do that, then we must just come out and say, we're not prepared to do it. So we are making a statement.
Are you comfortable taking a position like that within SADC and becoming your own country?
I'm very comfortable. I'm very comfortable. I would sleep better at night knowing that I've taken that stand than to turn a blind eye. And when someone says to me, but this went wrong in Zimbabwe, why are you not saying anything about it? I don't know how I would answer somebody when they said, this has happened, you wouldn't allow it in Botswana. I mean, some of the things that happened there would not happen here, or even in other SADC countries. So I'm more comfortable saying that. And even if we are going to be the only ones saying it, my conscience is clear. At least I have that, a clear conscience. I didn't answer your last part of the question. You said, how are relations with Zimbabwe? Well, let me just say that Zimbabwe is a neighbor. We cannot get away from that. So for now at least, they have a government in place. We will work with that government. And I said that some months ago after that election, that despite what has happened, that government has been recognized, and we will do business because it is in our interest, because it's for the benefit of both peoples, Botswana and Zimbabwe, that we work together. So we will continue to cooperate with them and build on that relationship.
So we could see you visiting Zimbabwe, we could see President Mugabe.
No problem. Yes, indeed.
I'd like to conclude this interview by bringing you back to Botswana politics and government. 2014 is an election year, as you've just alluded to, in Botswana, in which your party, the Botswana Democratic Party, will be seeking to defend and retain its current mandate to govern. How prepared is the Bdv for the elections?
We are prepared. Like with all previous elections, we have got a program of what steps we will be taking leading up to the date of the elections. And I don't mind telling you, because I've never considered that it should be a secret, that we will be holding the elections as usual in the month of October. The only thing that needs to be decided on is the actual day in October. So, you know, in some other countries you hear that the opposition saying that no, the president who has the power to decide on the date of the elections can suddenly spring an election and take us by surprise. So it's out there, it'll be in October, and preparations are in place for it. Yes, so we have got our preparations, and in the next couple of months we'll be launching our manifesto and launching our candidates after we've had the Congress that will elect the leader of the party who will take the BDP into the elections and beyond.
Are you contesting that election?
That's a good question. For now, I would say I am, because whatever I need to do based on everything we've been discussing today would be dependent on my contesting the election if I wish to, and if I do, and if I win, then it's then dependent on the population, the voters voting the BDP into office once again, whether I'll be there beyond 2014.
The recent primary elections did cause some shocks in the BDP, with surprise defeats against several members of your cabinet, Mr. President, and the subsequent refusal by some of the candidates to concede defeat. Were you shocked or surprised by the outcome of the primary elections?
It's called political evolution. With political evolution, people come and go. That is the nature of politics. And of course, everybody would want to see themselves who are contesting continuing. And sometimes their hopes are shattered. And with the sort of emotional results that will bring, you know, to each person, it's just something that is the nature. The thing is that we have to accept that is the nature of politics, that people will vote. You may get in, you may not. And if you go in with your eyes open and with that understanding, then if you do lose, you should accept it, because you also were voted in by winning and somebody lost. So at that time, when you won, you were euphoric about it. Someone was disappointed. So a time will come that the same may happen to you, and you should accept it. So I think that during the primary elections in the BDP, it is always a time of, it's a season of instability because of everybody, the competition that takes place. You'll see from the different people that some will accept, some will not, and others will probably want to take it to the first.